Travis Hartman, here we are again. I think this is like 3 times a charm or something, isn't it?
It's already all running together, Ross. I'm not sure.
You're so entertained. Well, thanks for taking some time for the Bigwater podcast here. I know, believe it or not, I think you personally are kind of boring, but yet people say bring Travis back on. Both of them.
Well, I'm predictable, right?
So we did a little bit of a game show thing before, because while this information is exciting to those that are hardcore into this stuff, it can maybe, like in your day job, we've joked about this before. It's sometimes, it's like reading off, medical reports or something. It's maybe not the most exciting thing to listen to, but yet it's really good information. And so we had a little fun with that before with let's make a deal style thing. Ross, did you know? I have prepared 0 for this. Producer dude is shaking his head. He knows. What did you prepare?
So I think this is a point where I'm going to take over the podcast. Right now, you're becoming the interviewee. I'm the interviewer.
Thank God. That is well needed. We've been waiting for that. So thank you, Travis.
So you're in the minority now, Ross. Now it's 2-on-1. So
I've been living there, but
this is actually almost a version of Did You Know? But what I would like to do is present you with things that we know, things that we measure, things that we see in our daily work here. And then I'd like you to tell me, what does that mean for your fishing? How does it alter where you fish? What techniques you use? Some of them might be short answers. I think a few of these questions we could probably spend the whole time on if you choose to. So,
and that's the neat part about this, is so many times when we talk both on the podcast or, privately, is the information that I'm getting from you. Some of that's kind of like, it makes it click in with what I'm seeing as a guy that's on the water almost every day. And then other times we kind of, rarely are we in disagreement on things. It's more of like, okay, maybe this makes sense, or here's a little scientific proof, putting real numbers with what I've kind of experienced. And I think this is important for people that, probably don't get to fish as much as I do, which is understandable, but now we're able to kind of help cut that curve for them a little bit.
Yeah, I think it could be really interesting, because some of the stuff on here you and I have discussed, I probably know what you're going to say, and other stuff I don't. So I'm curious to hear your take on some of it.
Let's do this.
All right. So I think it's fair, just since we have a broad audience and maybe not everyone knows Lake Erie extremely well, just to set the stage. We have almost 3 lakes in one. We have a shallow, warm, productive west basin. And then as you move east, you get deeper, colder, less productive. And many of our walleye spawn in the western basin. And they make an annual migration where they spawn here. Then they head east to colder, deeper water and return back here in the fall at some point. So that's kind of the starting point. And I'm going to kind of walk through a season if that works for you. So we're on a beautiful May day right now. It's cold out.
We are not in a beautiful May day, or I wouldn't be sitting here. I would be. This is a blow day, in full fairness for everyone.
Yeah, and it's cold and it feels like March more than May. But thinking about all that, this is the very tail end of the spawn. Probably still have a little bit of spawning going on right now, but mostly wrapped up. But one of the interesting things we see with telemetry is that the males come in, they go to a reef or go into a river, and they're there for 6 weeks or more. They hang out literally on individual reefs. One male will just circle and move around that reef for 6 weeks or more. On the other hand, you have females that'll stage off of these spawning areas, come in a very short period and drop her eggs, and then she leaves. So you have this dynamic of males that are there and they're going to be there, and you have females that are staging, coming in and leaving. So how do you use that in your locations and fishing techniques to target what you want to catch? I'm sure you have some clients that want to catch trophies and want to get the fish of a lifetime, others that maybe want to catch them with a rod in their hands. So how do you use their spawning, gender-specific techniques to target what you want to catch?
Yeah, I mean, I think on the short of it is, a lot of people that aren't from here, and you talk to on the phone as a captain guide client, relationship, and these people think like, hey, I want a hand and rod. Like, I live in Minnesota, I want to jig fish, right? Like, I don't want to troll crankbaits or whatever it may be. And again, me and you have talked about this privately, so I guess I'll bounce it back to you a little bit. But I would say, generally speaking, I almost never catch females or a fish that is noticeably a female, or a fish that's noticeably over, let's say, 4 pounds on a jig. And I think it's just a location thing, right? Like those are the males. The females are there for 2 minutes. They're spawning, they're leaving, they're out. So when I get these people that think, hey, we're on Lake Erie, there's 100 million fish, there's giant fish. I'm really good jig fisherman, so that's what I want to go do.
Mm-hmm.
But the reality is almost you have zero shot of catching a female, or a mature female, spawning female, or whatever that may be, or even post spawn, because those fish, in my experience, then tail off. You know, they go to those deep flats, and the period between A and B there is so small that while someone, I'm sure, is going to type in here and comment, well, I have, and you say, well, I'm sure out of 100 million fish between A and B, definitely there could be some biting going on there, but it's a very small window, and the odds are not in your favor. So, you know, again, and the other thing that, you know, I've learned through you guys, just kind of confirming some of our stuff, is that pre-spawn bite. It may be pre-spawn for fish A, B, and C, but not D, E, and F. And it's because we're like this, I always explain to people, and you can correct me, you know, it's like a conveyor belt where all of the fish aren't spawning at the same time like they may on Leech Lake or something, where we have multiple waves, generally the biggest fish going first. And so, you know, when we're chasing pre-spawn fish, we may be able to do that for 2 or 3 weeks, but it's because of these multiple waves. And so, yes, I'm going in some of those same areas, and one day it's better than the next as these waves kind of keep coming through. So,
yeah, that's completely accurate. What we've seen in the years that we've sampled and caught fish with our survey gear around spawning time is those biggest females go first, and that can change each year. You know, some years we have ice until late March, early April, and things get pushed back. Other years we don't have any ice, and it can start early to mid-March. But generally, biggest females go first. As it progresses through the spawn, you start seeing more and more of the younger, smaller females. But one thing we did see, and I don't know if you can agree with this because of your results or not, but the females tend to show up around full moon events. So if you want to know that you have a better chance with a jigging rod and jigging the reef to, you know, get one of those rare females while fishing that area, it's around a full moon event, and likely in March if you want a truly big fish, or at least a chance to catch one jigging.
I think a lot of that, I hate to even say this out loud, but I guess we're gonna give a little bonus to those that do listen to this, right? Is I think a lot of that, when I've seen that, it's actually at night. Like when they actually bite, it's a night deal, you know, whether they're doing their thing during the daytime and feedings at night, or 100% with these moon phase things, you'll see it all the time where you're like, man, every fish I'm catching is pre-spawn. We have a full moon, and literally overnight, you do not catch a fish, you know, knowingly that is blown up with, you know, with eggs, or if you do, it's maybe an older fish that is absorbing them because you're like, this is a, you know, a rock down there. But yeah, it's an overnight thing. I mean, same thing with the water temperature. You know, it only takes just a little bit, and all of a sudden you're like, we're way too cold, we're way behind. You have a nice day or two, you don't have the wind blowing out of the east, and all of a sudden it's just the skies, you know, rocket ship just jumps right up. And things happen fast out here, good or bad, they happen fast.
Well, you mentioned water temperature, so I'm going to go right into the next one because I think we covered that first one pretty well. I guess needless to say, when you really target those females, you're trolling, right? You're trolling in the staging areas around the reefs, and that's how you're going to take your best shot at catching those fish. But since you mentioned temperature, so walleye and all freshwater fish up here are cold-blooded. Obviously, they don't control their own body temperature. So how do you adjust your speed and presentation to some extent to match water temperature? Is there a direct connection to how warm the water is and how fast you could expect to be going? If it wasn't blowing 30 today, what would you be out there doing with 40-degree water temps in early May?
The answer is I don't. And two-prong approach to this. So I work with Fishhawk, which is a speed and temp probe. And so I've watched this stuff a lot, and this may blow your mind, but I think temperature actually matters more in the summertime than it does in the spring and the fall. And again, you're the guy I truthfully want to know the response on this from a more scientific standpoint. Is two things going on. People misinterpret their speed, which I'll come back to. But number one is me and producer dude. Do you remember when we were shooting that with Country Steve, that video? It was like January 1st. Water was like 33 degrees. And we did like a 90-degree turn. Do you remember that, producer dude?
I do remember that. It was a pretty flat calm that day too, right?
It was literally, we had to wait because first thing in the morning there was skim ice. and it was not a breath of air. And we had one boat. There was like literally one boat, and he found me. He found me. And he decided that he needed to, like, I didn't know if he was going to detail my boat or what he was going to do. He was so close. But we had to do like a 90-degree turn because this guy literally stopped 100 feet from us. I'm like, you got to be kidding me. And at that point, the fast side turn getting away, I mean, we were catching some fish, but cranked the speed to like 2.5, 32, 33 degree water temp surface anyhow. So not down below, it's probably not much warmer if at all. And we just started rocking them. Two things going on there. We were only catching fish, generally speaking, going one way. You put the fish hawk down, the current, right? So I think that there's two things that go on. A lot of times I'm hearing guys, even this week, alone, I can't get them unless I'm going 2 to 2-2. Where, as a guy that's fishing every day, not beat the horse, but, you see this and you're like, hey, today it's 1.2 is the prime. The next day it's 1.5. I think so much of this is misinterpreted because of what your actual speed is because of the current, especially when we get like a big east wind. It backs that up. It switches. When you put a fish hawk down, people, you will learn that you're not really trolling where you think you are. Your boat may be going 1.8, 1.9. Your lures may be doing 1.1, 1.12, something like that. And so I think that that's a huge, huge deal. And from day to day, the speed thing changes so much that we actually just put another video out, and it was slow side turns. And we were literally stalling the boards. And that's how our big fish were being caught, where the lures quite literally were floating up. And then we were catching some on husky jerks, which sit there absolutely motionless. And that's when they were biting. So I think speed does matter, but I think it's misinterpreted that the number 1.5 isn't really 1.5 all the time.
So I think a lot of it, it's physiologically speaking, it's more of how long it takes to digest that fish they just ate. Maybe in a trolling sense, like you were just talking about, it's fine to go 2, 2.5 or 3 when it's cold, but maybe you have to get it within a foot of their face for them to decide to make that effort to grab it. But, and we'll get into, you mentioned kind of the summer thing and maybe temperature mattering more with speed in the summer. We'll come back to that one shortly. But
well, actually, backing up, here's another good example maybe, and you can throw in your scientific on this. When you see guys jig fishing, right? So let's say our boat, we kind of know it's drifting about what it is, and you can look at your SOG for that, pretty accurate. And you see guys jigging like they're having a heart attack or something, right? You see these guys and they're just ripping the tar out of something, and then they're catching fish, because I've seen these guys. I'll watch when we're jigging, there's generally people in close enough vicinity. And when you see that guy that's looking like he's having a heart attack that's jigging, and he's catching them, hey, we need to do something a little more aggressive, whether it's moving in the water column or what have you. But then so many days you're almost just basically lifting and dropping that jig, right? And that's the difference. And really, it's exponential, almost the same thing that it would be if it was trolling.
I think we need to revisit this detailing your boat thing. And that guy's defense, like he saw the boat. It needed it, right? Like, when was the last time you cleaned the inside of that thing?
Well, it's, I probably need a power washer sponsor, but in fairness to me, the boat was wrapped, and so it looked clean. It looked clean. He could not see the inside technically, but I understand where you're going with that. It's reasonable.
All right. Well, we're going to move about a month from now, maybe 3-4 weeks from now. Put yourself in the mindset of Memorial Day, late May, early June. And we know over here in the West, for the bigger migratory fish that haven't left yet, they have access to a food source that they don't have the rest of the year. So we have mayflies starting to move around the sediment, becoming active, getting ready to swim up and emerge. Usually that primarily happens in June. Seems like later each year than maybe a decade ago for whatever reason. But you have these fish that have a new food source, a unique food source that they don't usually have access to. And it seems like there's a technique that becomes pretty popular that time, primarily spinners. So do you see a connection between the mayflies becoming active and being available and that spinner bite getting really good?
I think what it is just a smaller package, right? I think what it is just, when you got these giant crankbaits and you're going Mach 10, and now there's probably, you can look at them on your graph, right? There's 4, 5, 6, 7 feet thick of just almost motionless things that are just slowly floating to the surface. And I've often wondered, like, do you just think because they're down there, right? And unlike us swimming in a pool, like our mouths hopefully aren't open, are they really eating these things? Or is it just like, because there's so bloody many of them down there, is it almost like a filter deal where they're going through them? Can they get that much nutrition out of them?
It's one of those cases where it's least effort for the most return, right? They are very highly nutritious. And like you said, there are literally clouds of them. Even before there are clouds in the water column, they're crawling around the sediment. So I think it's one of those cases where why would you pass it up? And yeah, if you can almost functionally filter feed, you're going to fill up. But that brings me to the next question. And you'll hear from anglers that don't fish Erie often, man, should I even come? I hear it's really tough. What impact do you think it has on maybe their feeding windows, or how easy or hard they are to catch? Should you not come then if you're new to the lake?
I don't think so at all, because there's certain fish, just like people, like there's people don't eat hamburgers, right? Don't matter best hamburger on the planet, they don't eat hamburgers. And producer dude, he's like, he's vegan damn near, right? So he ain't gonna eat like that steak right there. He's gonna be like, yeah, you go ahead and take it. Right? This is a true story. That's not even a joke. But
true story.
He's way healthier than all of us. But I can tell you that I've seen certain years where the bite definitely has been harder than other years. Some years you don't seem to miss a beat, right? And rather that's because that mayfly hatch is strung out or not as thick, or it's more diluted, right? But I think the spinner thing, 100%, or small spoons is another deal that guys use. I think that little bit of flash and just a smaller package. But I think the overlook thing is also just, depth in the water column. When you start getting post-spawn fish, you start getting some smaller fish biting now. You're not catching those on a hair jig in 5-10 foot of water. To me, when I can put a smaller package in deeper water, like I can't do that with a crankbait, right? You take a husky jerk, at some point you can only get it so deep. And it's only can be so small. Like the smaller the crankbait, generally the shallower it's going to go. And I think, to me, I can run a tiny spinner package down literally on a bottom bouncer, 3-way, whatever it may be, or a small bead chain, and I can get down quick. And so for me, I think that's a big thing. I would usually tell guys too to look for a harder bottom, because there's going to be less mayflies in that vicinity. Again, you correct me here anytime I'm wrong. Of course, I know you won't hesitate for that. But those are they're basically, they're gestating, is that the proper term, down in the mud. They come up through, right? Mm-hmm. On a hard bottom, like you're not going to have any, if hardly any, of those in that area. And there are large sections out here of lake, miles quite literally, whether it's rock or compacted mud, zebra mussels or whatever. You just don't have as many of those things. So you get into an open mud flat, you're going to see giant waves on your fish finder that look like the thing's broke from those mayflies. So when in doubt, just stay away from them.
So kind of continuing this line of thought. So as the mayflies are wrapping up, as that is ending, a lot of the big adult migrating fish are out of here. And we know from our telemetry that less than 10%-ish stay. They stay in the Western Basin. They're not the typical migrator that most of them are. And there's also, if you want to call them local fish, I hear a lot of talk about local fish. It's not exactly something that's easy to prove or conclusively show. So I know you tend to fish around the islands or east of the islands. You don't necessarily go all the way to, Conneaut, Pennsylvania, New York, and follow the big schools of the migrating fish. I'm curious what you do, or what you see as things that you do to find those bigger fish, to find the ones that didn't migrate, to find maybe the local fish. Do you have techniques or areas that you think hold those fish?
I think I've been set up, but I'm going to be honest. I'm pretty open on this. I'm not going to completely tell you my answer. I'm not going to lie to you. That's kind of a trade secret thing a little bit, but
not looking for
yeah, I think that I tend to fish slower than most people. And I think that a lot of times when you get in the best area and you slow down, it's better. If you're pulling at Mach 10 with crankbaits or spoons, you're going to get the low bearing fruit, as you'll say, right? And that's great until you have a little front, or you have this, or there's a full moon and they're feeding at night, or whatever. There's 100 different things, or maybe they just aren't eating that day, right? It's like Monday morning or something. So I think when you get in the areas that are what I would call high percentage or reproducible, because as a guide, I'm always trying to, I don't generally fish the areas that necessarily have the most amount of fish. I'd rather deal with a lot less traffic and fish that I know are going to be there tomorrow. Like me and you have, we fished together quite a bit, whether it's in the same boat or not, it's a different deal. But I mean, and I like to go to areas that like, hey, these fish aren't going to move 10 miles from when I left them yesterday afternoon. And you'd be surprised that when you get in those high percentage areas and you fish them slow, you just have a whole lot different results than if you were to go through there at Mach 10.
Well, that comes back to the, are you covering water to put your lures in front of the most fish, or do you know where fish are and you're going to make them bite, right? And
right.
It kind of comes back to knowing what you're doing and relating that speed to what you're trying to accomplish. So let's say that maybe you're well east of the islands, you're out in open water. Maybe a lot of the fish have gone, but there's still some migrators that are out in open water east of the islands. We know that because of Lake Erie's depth and the way the lake lays out, that we get a thermocline. So you get a hard thermocline, temperature transition, and then you get water below it that becomes anoxic at some point. It's depleted of oxygen. So that impacts where bait fish are. It impacts walleye behavior and location. When you're out in those situations, do you use that to your advantage? Are you looking for fish on the thermocline? Are you able to go fast but cover the right depth? How do you approach open water summer fishing when you have that thermocline in place?
Well, percentage wise, I definitely spend more time, let's say, in the central basin and probably the central to western end of that as far as number of actual days. Because you're right. I mean, I don't go any farther east than I have to. A lot of it's the guide clients, the business, just everything, lodging. It's a whole package deal, right? But I mean, I was just talking to one of the guys the other day, and he's like, "Yeah, I forgot when you used to, rent a place down in Conneaut in Geneva for a month, and back when the business was a little bit different and people were a little bit different with what they wanted too. We did chase those fish more, and we had to do that when we didn't have 100 million fish, because 10% of what we have now is a whole lot more than 10% of what it was 15 years or roughly ago when I was doing that. But the thing that I would tell people that's kind of off topic, but really not for what you just asked is people see walleyes and they think about 30 feet or less. So many bodies of water you're at. And it's when I put pictures up that I was in deep water today or something, I make comments like that. I always get blasted by a bunch of people that are like, wish I could only fish 50 feet of water, because they're salmon guys, right? And they're in 300, 400, 500 feet of water, whatever it is. And I think though with walleyes, people get really kind of wigged out and uncomfortable with, let's say, 80, 90 feet of water, 70, 80, 90 feet of water as we get in the western end of the eastern basin or the eastern side of the central basin. So let's say for somebody that's in North Dakota, listen to this, let's say just west of Cleveland to the Pennsylvania line in that range, or maybe to like, Fish USA is one of my partners over there in Pennsylvania, like in that range. That's where a lot of fish kind of get stacked up in the summertime. And I think it's almost easier to me, because when you're down there, you don't have fish spooking from the cone, number one. And I almost don't care if I mark walleyes. I really don't, because I think there are some days when that water I can see 20 feet down, that they are spooky, and, with presentations on how we catch them dictates, that is the case. But when I drive over them at 20, 25 miles an hour, I'm still going to mark the bait, and I'm always looking for that bait or the thermocline. So even though we're in 70, 80, 90, you can say 100 feet of water, doesn't matter. Realistically, I'm putting my lures in 10 foot of water column, plain and simple, not much more than that. And I actually learned quite a bit from one of the other podcasts we did on the acoustic telemetry, where they said that I'm making up terms because they weren't the proper ones, but basically those fish are at or below that thermocline because they burn too much energy chasing stuff. And the only ones that do are the small fish that are non-sexually mature, I think was the term. So basically the dinks that are legal fish, but not much more than that. And that's 100% been my experience. You can go run stuff, and I'll occasionally, you see some marks or some bait high, you'll run some stuff high, and man, you catch some fish, boom, 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 but they're 16, 17, 18 inches maybe. And again, when you're down in that neck of the woods and on a smelt based, fishery basically at that point. You are looking for better fish. That's why, you know, a lot of the guys go down there. And so to me, those fish, even though there could be anywhere, and you think about, hey, I got to spread my lures out 80 feet. No, you don't. You got a 5 to 10 foot window in most days. And that's why, to kind of back this up, if I was on court here, what I would say, like, hey, look at guys that run a wire line. Guys have been doing this for 100 years. They got a couple different predetermined leads of wire line that they use. And the only adjustment is where the thermocline's at, as far as where they move that up and down. And not to get too long-winded, but a really good story. We shot a video producer dude put together for us here last, I want to say it was like August. I think it was when we did it. I went down there and it was crazy. I literally watched the thermocline from the storm just get blown out, went almost right to the bottom. And, you know, typically down there, I would say 40 to 50 feet is the window. You know, that's generally where we're at, where the thermocline now is like 60, 65. That's a little tougher to fish multiple lines in that depth and consistently keep stuff in there, you know, and it definitely cut down on the arsenal as far as what we could catch them on. But we did. And that was knowing that to go down there. And then sure enough, again, just watching it, didn't even have to use the fish hawk, even though we did for the current standpoint and driving our speed off of it. I could just see that thermocline basically readjust, is the term I'm going to use, and it reset up, you know, a little bit deeper than it normally would. I want to say it was like 55 or 60 when it kind of reset back up there on day 2 of that deal. And it was crazy though, because you just watched all the fish and all the bait, boom, they went back to that comfort level. It's like standing in front of an air conditioner in the Keys or something in August. It's what's going to happen. And it's very reproducible compared to what we experience in the cold water periods in the central or western basin, to me.
So you just covered so many things that I've got to kind of go through my list and like mention some of the things that I was going to ask you that you've already answered. But I think it's important to note that based on the acoustic telemetry, and we have tags that record depth. So if we get the tag back, you know, we have this whole history of what depth the walleye was in during the life of that tag while it was at large in the lake. And we don't have walleye that are just over 100 or 150 feet of water down there in the eastern basin. They're 100 to 150 feet down. I think that likely all of us have this, you know, view in our head of what depth walleye may be in and what we might be seeing on the sonar, depending how deep we are. I'm here to tell you, in Lake Erie, walleye can be down to 100, 150 feet deep. So
okay, so here's my question, not to derail the train here, but if you got those walleyes that are 150 feet down, I'm going to tell you that they rarely see a lure. And maybe that's why we don't see as many 10, 12, 11, 12, 13 pounders or whatever the biggest fish in the system are. But through the acoustic stuff, can we correlate that those are the bigger fish that are down there?
So I would have to go back and look at the data set for that. Obviously, we have the fish size for each of those fish that we get the tags back for. So we could filter it and look at, you know, are the biggest fish the ones that are most likely to be that deep? My sense is no. My sense is,
really,
if you're a female and you migrate down there, it looks like there's a chance you're going to utilize water that deep at some point. And keep in mind, you know, we talked about the thermocline and lack of oxygen. You get down to the East Basin, there's oxygen below the thermocline. It does not get used up. It is fully oxygenated, the whole water column, even though there is a thermocline with a temperature gradient. But they have access to all that water and they use it if there's a reason to.
Is that the case also, let's say, from Cleveland to like Erie, Pennsylvania?
No. So somewhere at around Pennsylvania, so eastern Ohio or east of Ohio, somewhere you hit the point where it transitions from no oxygen below the thermocline to having oxygen below the thermocline. It's mostly that eastern basin. It's safe to say the long point, at the point that makes the eastern basin, you know, from there east, there is oxygen. I'd have to look at some of the details to see west of there how far that goes.
Interesting. That's like really, and again, that simple information that is not going to change, right? Like I love stuff that like lasts more than a day or two, right? This is like decades worth that you now know that you can eliminate a good portion of the water column or cannot eliminate a certain portion of the water column. It's as knowing what you can or can't is just as important as the other.
And a lot of times, even if you're sonar if you don't have it tuned in and or you don't know how to interpret where that thermocline is. In our central basin, just look at the fish, right? If there's no oxygen below that thermocline, you will see the thermocline because of where fish are. And you mentioned something interesting that I wanted to circle back on. You were talking about like the depth of range that you're trying to put all your lures in, and I think you mentioned maybe a 10-foot range. So keep in mind with walleye, they can't quickly adjust their swim bladder inflation. So you think about salmon and trout, like, steelhead, you can get a hit, you can see your rod go slack, and then it's jumping out of 50 feet of water. It's jumping before your rod even loads up. Walleye can't do that. They have to slowly adjust their depth in the water column. They have to make longer adjustments to their air bladder inflation. So I was going to ask, is 10 feet the magic window? If you're within 10 feet of a walleye, do you think it'll come up to hit? Or in that central basin situation, is it more like 5 feet? How close are you trying to put the bait to their nose, knowing they can't make big adjustments in the water column from depth?
Man, I honestly don't know how to answer that, because I think the other thing too is so many times because of current, like the word current, like we could just do a billion podcasts, but the problem is it's not like 2 + 2. Like people listen to this one, 2 + 2, and that's 4. It's always 4. It's always going to be 4. And with current, that's just not the case. And I think coming back to your question is like, well, we may think this is where the lure's at, because I've watched it with different, like Fishhawk has a little probe deal that you basically can put on, and it'll tell you based on pressure, like, hey, how deep that is. And my point is you can run 5 colors or 10 colors at times. And because of the density in the water, we're getting kind of deep here, right? Or also because of the current, all that stuff basically rolls together. So a bait that should be 50 feet down on a full core is no deeper than a half a core, which is, roughly 25 feet down, right? Because it's all just both the water layer and also the current. It just causes, like, it's not stronger. It's just like a leaf in the wind, and it just goes where it's going to go. And I think sometimes, again, same thing with people are like, oh, I've got a 3-ounce sinker on. Like, dude, that current out there drowns grown human beings that are like great swimmers. Like, the difference between 2 ounces and 3 ounces may be huge when you're going a mile an hour. But you can't adequately tell truly where you're at with your stuff.
And that's fair. I think your 10-foot window is probably as good of a ballpark as anything. It turns out those things matter, and especially when you get fish oriented at depth, and while the water might be clear enough to see something 20 feet above their head, likely they're not going 20 feet up to get it just because of their physical limitations.
Right. Yeah. The 10-foot could just be, let's say I'm 5 foot off where I think I am. Because again, that like you said, that thermocline is almost like it's a new bottom is what I like to call it, right? Like everything else below that, where I'm talking about fishing, generally doesn't matter a whole lot, and so that it's a soft new bottom. That's one of the terms I've used in seminars before.
I've always said that you're at least 5 feet off, but that's my personal opinion.
I'll take 5. I'll take 5.
So it does bring up something interesting, though, talking about that depth, and generally we're talking clear water over there, but it's something that we all, whether we know it or not, consider regardless of the depth we're fishing in, and that's color. So I think you would probably agree, and many people are aware that the colors disappear in the old Roy G. Biv order. So red, orange, and yellow are apparent high in the water column. The deeper you go, they disappear. Then you lose green. Then the last colors you lose are blue, indigo, and violet. So we all think about lure color. We all that troll a lot. We all have boxes and boxes and boxes of different color lures. How do you think those colors disappearing and light refraction and how that all plays out, how does that impact your color selection as you go deeper in the water column? Because the deeper you get, the fewer colors are apparent.
If I was a politician or a lawyer, I could probably sell this either way to you, because I have so much experience, with when color has mattered or it hasn't. And the problem is I don't think we have enough controls to know why that was that day and not the next. Like we literally just had a guide trip, I don't know, it's like maybe 4 days ago at this point. And we had a lure that we've been doing really good on, and it was on a high lead. And so I was like, let's bring that one in, boys. That ain't caught jack. And I put it on the inside, and I looked over and I saw a bunch of bait and a couple of high fish. And I said, I'm going to switch the lure out. And I put it on the inside, with a lure color that had been working on the opposite side, very deep, much, much deeper in the water column. Dude, this bait where we had run the paint off of another one, that passed, but we had caught enough fish on the other stuff that we couldn't really monkey with that. And I still kind of like to leave a little checker out there. But at any rate, long story short, we took another color, put it on the inside, which, I don't like doing normally for a fairly high rod as far as depth in the water column. And it just started going. I mean, it was like it was hooked up almost nonstop for, 5-6 fish and probably a 20-minute period, just in and out, in and out. Color mattered then, because no matter where that was in the spread later, that worked. But again, working with companies like Silver Streak and Reef Runner for, almost 20 years, I worked with those guys. And I think of both of those guys as the color kings. I mean, they both had like 400 stock colors, right? But the funny part is when you look at chrome, as I do a little research on stuff, like chrome supposedly, because none of our stuff in lures, it's not like a high-end finish. It's, these aren't gold plated. And so I've been told chrome after so many feet in the column, which basically we're assuming as long as we don't have like crazy clean water and lots of sunlight, with the light penetration that we're dealing with realistically in the water column, chrome becomes black at the depths that we're fishing. And I start thinking about that same thing, red-headed wonderbread or something, all these different colors that are so good, or red throats on this, all of these things. Are we just literally fishing black lures down there? And then you throw some purple or some blue in, that when the things are a little bit better, that's why that picks it up, because those colors do come off as differently. There's a lot of the popular colors now. You look at like Rapala, they've got 3 Husky Jerk stock colors that are basically all black. I mean, there's some spots and some things to make it so that it's not one color, a little marketing maybe in there, right? But, and they're really popular. I can tell you, they really catch them. So,
some of that might come back to contrast, right? But you did, you kind of walked me right to a point I wanted.
Am I stealing your thunder again?
No, actually, you're going right where I expected you to go.
That's a first on Producer Dude.
Yeah. It turns out that walleye eyes, their eyes aren't perfect. They're very well suited to low light conditions. And it turns out they actually have fuzzy vision to some extent. So their cones are extremely large. So if you're going to characterize their vision as sharp or fuzzy, those extremely large cones mean that they probably have fuzzy vision. So
really,
they see well at low light. They have an advantage over their prey when light's low. And the interesting thing about the colors they see red, orange, and yellow very well. They see green, and functionally, they don't see blue, indigo, or violet. And I've heard it mentioned that because blue, indigo, and violet are the ones that last the longest, they're the deepest in the water column that are still apparent, to walleye, they likely look black because of their eye structure. So what it might come down to is contrast. What colors produce contrast based on color absorption and clarity and all that?
Well, it's funny you should say that, because 2 things there. I mean, there's a lot of days where chrome blue, that's no stranger. I love me some chrome blue crankbaits, and then chrome purple. And there are days where chrome purple will be 5-1 over chrome blue, and the next day it's the exact opposite. And it don't matter if I put 5 of them out, I put one on one side, one on the other, mix them around. It's like that is the preference. There's no doubt. And when you start kind of putting the science behind it, that shouldn't make sense like that from what everything we're saying. Mm-hmm. And then I would say that the second half of that, when we talk about contrast, then maybe our contrast definition is a little different. But like with spinner blades, I want contrast, whether it's my beads, the front, the back of the blade, dots, something on there. I 100% am always looking for contrast. And, back to Lori Rapala, way back in the day, like the original one, that's what it was. It was white, silver, and black. And when that thing rolls, it provides contrast, because that's what minnows and other, the things do. And I think that for me, when I'm on a crankbait or a spinner thing, if I'm doctoring it up or having a color, 100% contrast, something that just changes that profile as it wiggles, wobbles, or spins.
So I think it comes down to, we really like colors. Scott Stecker often said, it's the fishermen that are buying my color schemes, not the fish. But you also said the other reality is that when one color is working over the other, that's a real thing that day in that location at that time. So obviously adjust to what works, right?
The color thing is, I always say it like this: us fishermen, we like to dictate what we think works or doesn't work. We come up with these things, and we try to conceive why something didn't work or did work or whatever it may be. But the weird thing, and I've told clients this that fish with me, they know this a lot, is there's a couple different captains. We fish side by side quite a bit, whether it's communicating or just by chance, being on the same kind of good fish. And how many times at the end of the day or in the parking lot, they'll say, "Hey man, did you have purple demon out there?" or whatever the color is. And be like, "Yeah, I couldn't catch jack on it. I was pile driving them, but I couldn't." And I'll be like, "Man, that was our best one," or vice versa. And you look at the differences in these colors, especially if it was like chrome blue to purple demon. Anybody that's had one of those, I mean, that's night and day. That's apples and oranges. And even when we run a multiple boat trip, like you fished with me and run a group of people, and we're all fishing right in the same stuff. And at the end of the day, we're all doing something very, very different and have different results. And I just wonder, that's why I don't like to place color there, except for I could tell you another 10 stories where when I text someone or they text me and say, "Hey, did you try black-headed wonderbread?" And you put one out and you're like, "Oh my God." Like you put 8 of them out. That's what they want. Like, we were catching fish and everything else, but we are really catching them now. And even though it didn't really make sense. And so when you have 5 boats that all are definitely catching way more on black-headed wonderbread or insert color here, color matters, but I think oftentimes we misinterpret it, or we think that that's all that it is. So when you put 8 of them out, that's, well, you can catch them on because that's all you got out. Right?
Yeah. Well, and I do think there are likely regional differences. So a walleye fishery in North Dakota with different water color characteristics and different prey, might have different go-to colors. And I think a good example of that, you look at Lake Erie, Western Basin walleye are eating gizzard shad and emerald shiners for the most part. Central Basin walleye are eating rainbow smelt. And then across the lake, they're all eating at times gobies, white perch, yellow perch, the less preferred stuff that they might encounter. But have you looked at many Lake Erie gizzard shad? I know you obviously see some dead occasionally. You probably see some in the stomach.
We saw a lot dead this year.
Yeah, right. I've noticed in some of the fish that we catch that some of the gizzard shad are almost gold plated. They're not what you think of when you think of a gizzard shad.
The bigger ones, especially.
Well, and I'm thinking more of those, the 5, 6, 7, 8 inchers, the big young of year in the fall. And when they get stressed, they get a red nose. They'll actually have some blood vessels or something burst in their nose. So you look at these gizzard shad that are gold with a red face, and then you think about like gold clown and some of the colors that we run.
100%.
There's times we're matching the hatch when maybe we don't realize we're matching the hatch.
Yeah, I don't know where to go with that. I mean, like, I think a lot of the other stuff we talked about is more scientific and explainable, where when you look at, like, I can remember as a kid watching something, they go, "Have you ever seen a fire tiger minnow before?"
Yeah, right.
And again, fire tiger, and when you can see 20 feet down, like, really? But the color thing is I think subjective. But again, I'm a pretty good spinner fisherman. That's kind of my deal. Like, I'll put myself up with anybody doing that. That's my favorite thing to do, and it's just a different deal. And honestly, I don't use many things. I own a billion silver streak spinners, but I tend to go with about a half a dozen, and I'll switch, many variables around in there. But I know when me and you are spinner fished, when I say against each other, at the same day in the same general area, and at the end of the day, I look in your boat and I'm like, "What the is that?" Like,
well, thank you.
What? Yeah, it's not a compliment. It's not a compliment. And I'm just like, what? And my spinner stuff, just from a lot of days, I have it narrowed down to a few different things for the conditions. And I think it's so much more about, as long as you're in the game with it, that it's more about the speed, the presentation, the size, the depth, right? But yet, obviously, there's other guys over here catching fish, and they're not doing that. And so all these fish are not hitting this, antifreeze, silver streak, whatever it may be, or gold plated this or that. But I can tell you, I think consistently I would catch more just because I think guys get a little too crazy with the colors. I mean, some of these custom painted baits that I see, just people putting them up on, that's the new thing on Facebook is you just see all these feeds and there's just, it's not, they don't show fish anymore. They just show, well, you see feet from some people, but it's just, you see piled up on the floor, whatever that trend, however that gets started. But then they want to show me all their crankbaits, right? Mm-hmm. And I look at these things. I don't know about you. I mean, be real with me for a minute. Like I look at these and I'm like, if you gave me a case of those, I'm not putting it in the water. I'm just not.
I would rather put the wrong color in front of the right fish anytime. Find the fish, find the active ones, put the lure style they want in front of them at the speed they want. And I mean, how many days do you actually have the ability to fine tune color? You don't, right? Like it's not like you can get to every day where there's one depth and one lead and one spot that's incredible, and then you're tweaking color.
Actually, there's a funny story there. So this is probably 2 weeks ago. We're shooting this deal, and a well-known local charter captain comes up to me at the end of the day, and he says, "Hey, man, you always shoot me straight on stuff when I need it." He goes, "Here's the payback," and he gives me these baits, right? And they're like 3 or 4 of the same exact lure in this color pattern. I look at the color pattern like I would never put that thing in the water. I probably have a couple of those, but I would never put it in the water. Those things. And he goes, "Dude," and you could see they're chewed up. You see the hooks are, but there's like unmistakable. It's not like hook rash just on these things. And one of his guys was there and had watched our podcast, ironically enough, and he said to me, he's like, "Dude, oh my God, we've been slaying them on this the last 2 or 3 days." So the next morning, out of 8 rods, I put 2 of those out. Right? I never touched a fish. Ironically, I see this guy at the end of the day and I go, "Lure's back." And he goes, "I never touched one on it today." And it's one of those things where you're like, yeah, it matters, but it's the fun thing to talk about. I think with guys, this is like purses and shoes for dudes is a good portion of this, 100%, right? But at the same point, I can tell you, working on the business end of things, like with Silver Streak Lures, for example, every year, like I've just got some of my samples, which will be potentially new colors for next year. Okay. And out of that 20 some colors, there's probably 4 that are going to come out. And it's because it's the 4 that consistently the 10 or 12 people he works with, that on his inner circle that say, "Hey, these are the ones." Like we don't talk, we don't communicate even amongst these at the end. He's like, always the same 4 or 5 guys say the same 4 or 5 things. Right. And that's the bulk of that. And all these other ones just go away. So color does matter, but I think like you said, what was your more eloquent way of saying it? I'd rather have the wrong color and the right fish or something.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah. Something like that for sure. You have to find fish, then they have to be active, and then you've got to put something in front of them they want. And to me, color is truly 4th in order of what I'm going to truly worry about. And it's hard to catch fish on rods that are in the boat because you're changing the color for the 4th time in the last 15 minutes or 20 minutes, right?
Well, as long as I've been doing this, I would say that I feel like I've learned more in the last few years based on this topic than I have in a long time, because I'm running, I would say day in and day out now, I'd run 8 rods. Obviously some days I can't legally do that. So we're down to 6 or something, but I would say most days, no matter how many people I have in the boat, I'll just run 8 rods unless the bite's crazy difficult or crazy good. Mm-hmm. And those extra few rods from what I used to run really do make a difference, because those 1, 2, or 3 more are something that I'll put checkers, or I'll put that lure that guy gave me out where I wouldn't normally do that. Right. And you'd be amazed how many days you do see a difference, whether it's good or bad. Mm-hmm. Because you could just run some more stuff through them. With that said, how many days I'm going to ask you this. How many days have you been out there and you're catching fish? It's 1 here, 2 here, maybe you get a couple doubles. It's on the same old stuff. You've got your 10 colors that you typically use, right? We all do. And then all of a sudden you hit a pod and you catch 8 at one time. Like I got 8 lines and I have 8 fish on. Pretty sure that they didn't care about that, that I didn't have the orange belly on that bait, because you just went through a pod of angry, hungry fish.
No, you were using the lures with 1 big dot instead of 3 small dots, obviously. But to me, what's more important is, do they want white-based baits? Do they want chrome baits? Do they want transparent baits? Like I do really worry more about families of color than I do, oh man, did it have a pink stripe or a purple stripe, or is it sunny or cloudy? Do they want chrome or do they want opaque?
It's so funny you should say that. Obviously, I do a lot of fishing media stuff, and some of the accounts that I do where we do fishing reports or even our own stuff. Bigwater page there, we do fishing reports and different things. And I literally get people that stop me at the gas station. Some of the conversations I have at the gas station, 1000% should be taped, even though they'd have to be so heavily edited. And I usually tell people, they're like, oh, so what are you catching them on? And I'll be like, well, the chromes that were better early, and then we went to the white stuff. And people literally look at me like I'm absolutely batshit crazy, or like, dude, you were supposed to tell me that you were on a purple voodoo. Or they start naming these colors. Yeah. Like because you don't give them that exact deal. But yet 100% agree with you that even when me and you fish, if you're out that day or something, I want to know, hey, do I need to have some chromes out? And I'll kind of figure out my favorites from there. 100% agree. Golds would be another one. Antifreezes. Back in the day, more than now, the bare naked stuff, or see-through, basically. For a long time, like a good example would be with Reef Runner. Pink lemonade was one of the best colors. Maybe still is. I don't know.
What do you mean was?
Well, I don't seem to do as good on it. But for a number of years, then Cranberry Crusher, for those not in the know, it's basically a bare naked or a transparent version of pink lemonade. And there was a number of years where, oh my God, that was just, for me, that was just killer. And again, I probably haven't put in the water as much, so that might be directly proportional to why the fish catching is down on that. But when you get into those little, the same basic color, but then you just get into a variation of it because of the water conditions. So if it is gin clear, in the summertime, but maybe that transparent one's going to work better than the big white one.
Yeah, we certainly spend a lot of time thinking and talking about it. And like I said, I remind myself often it's fourth on my list.
Producer dude's probably ready to tell me to move on because he's like, oh my God, you guys talk about colors, but that's what everybody likes to hear. But
yeah,
I mean, I guess acoustic telemetry doesn't really help us with colors, does it?
No, not one bit, not at all. Although I can tell you, one of the days that we did our first pilot testing to catch fish by fishing and put tags in them, we worked with a lot of charter captains and tagged a lot of fish that were caught by fishing, not by traditional fish sampling gear. And chrome baits on that first day that we did that for the first time were the best baits.
And the funny thing is right now, I don't know numbers, obviously, but I know I'm not off that chrome-based patterns are the best sellers, right? Whether it's gold or silver chrome or whatever you want to call it.
Metallic.
I can remember talking to, metallic, right? And I can remember back in the day, some of those baits when I was a kid, young guy doing this, that there was similar results. And then there was that pattern where a lot of those kind of crazy colors, the Wonder Breads, and then the bare naked stuff, like Reef Runner 100% changed the way people did paint patterns with that bare naked stuff. And it's like a different world because I can remember Scott saying he just doesn't sell any chrome Reef Runners. This is back, a number of years ago. And I'm like, huh? And that was right when that transformation, guys started pulling other baits and even like Rapala, like there was way more Husky Jerk colors that were, they had the glass series, they called it. And now they've got way more chrome or metallic finishes, I guess might be a better term. So crazy.
We're moving on now.
Thank you. I like how Ross said, oh, we've talked too long on this. And then he goes for another 2 minutes.
All right. Well, I'm going to fast forward us into fall fishing. We've talked about spring and summer, and it's really interesting what we see in our gill net catches. We have a transect off of Huron where every fall we set nets on that transect, we catch walleye, and it's always one of our best catch sites. But inshore to offshore, the catches are different every year. So, for example, 4 of the last 7 years, the closest near shore sites had the highest catches. By far, the nets near shore.
What are you calling near shore?
Within 3 miles of shore, 2 to 3 miles.
Okay.
So that's 4 of the last 7 years. 2 of the last 7 years, the farthest out, like near the border, international border sites, caught the most fish. So thinking about that, we're in October. We're off Huron, and obviously, if you could pick it, you'd go, a mile or 2 out of the river and fish, right? You don't want to have to make a long run. You'd like fish to be near shore.
My back and my pocket like the shorter run.
Exactly. So I'm curious when you're going out of Huron in October, what factors do you look at other than your sonar? So obviously sonar is like the real world, like yes, fish are here, fish aren't here. Are you looking at water clarity? Are you only looking for bait and fish on the sonar? What's what's kind of guiding your search for fish out of Huron? Because we've seen with our catches, it can be all the way out the border, or it can be a mile out of the river, and each year is different.
I'm not a water temperature guy because people looking at that number, you're going to get burned, whether it's how fast you're trolling or not or whatever. But when I say that to say this, so when we have what I would call a warm summer, and I look down and Huron is, I don't even know off the top of my head, but let's say 65 degrees or something, or 70 degrees. I'm like, buckle up, Buttercup, because we ain't going to fish 2 miles out. You just kind of know, like, and I think a lot of that is those fish have had no reason to circle back to that shallower or more westerly direction. Like they're still eating the same fish that they were, rainbow dace or maybe gizzards. I don't know, whatever it is to the east, right? They haven't left Cleveland yet.
No.
They're still at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
So I was going to lead you to gizzard shad. Obviously, when they get back here, at some point between Cleveland and Huron, they go from encountering mostly rainbow smelt to encountering mostly gizzard shad.
Where is the cutoff for rainbow dace or
rainbow smelt?
Rainbow smelt, yeah.
We see them as far west as Kelly's Island, but I would say somewhere around Lorain is kind of that natural break. If you're anywhere from Lorain west, you're likely not around smelt that often. And
what is the temperature that they can't take?
Well, they're like all other fish. They're, following that thermocline in the central basin in the summer. So their temperature preferences are probably very similar to adult walleye. And I'd have to look it up myself. I don't know what they, exactly what they prefer, but they're central basin, cooler water species. They're moving around on that thermocline all summer, and generally walleye are encountering them because they're looking for the same temperature, and that's the main prey there. But when you get to Lorain, and usually when you get west of Lorain, you're in the gizzard shad territory. And, when we sample walleye in the fall in that gillnet survey, we're cutting open all the stomachs. We're looking at diets, and more than half of the fish in the diets, and I'd have to look at the most recent few years, but I'm going to tell you it's probably well above half now, probably 75% or more of the fish we're seeing are gizzard shad. So they're fall fish. They're returning to this area. They're going to be where the gizzard shad are, right? Once they get back here and they're kind of in their staging mode for the rest of the fall and winter, they're going to be falling around gizzard shad.
So a fun fact on that, just pausing you for a second, because I know I confirmed this with you on a podcast or somewhere along the lines we did, just to bring that back. Gizzard shad out here can be, and again, at the boat launch, we've seen a pile of dead ones, and all of a sudden you just see one that looks like a whale. But those things can get 25, 26 inches long. People don't realize they mark just like walleyes, these big schools. But wasn't it the number like 9 months that once a gizzard shad is older than 9 months, it's almost too big for walleye to eat? Is that?
Yeah. So I was going to lead you to, so I was going to ask you how the gizzard shad size relates to crankbait size. So obviously, if you look at fall, young of year, so shad that were hatched this year were in their first fall, the average size in a walleye stomach is 4 to 5 inches. So unfortunately for them, for the gizzard shad, their average size is right in the prime walleye food item size. But you get into that next year and they're 8 or 9 inches or over, and they grow out of the size where walleye can easily eat them. And especially when you start looking at their height, they start getting some real height to their body.
I had a walleye one time that spit up a sheephead. I mean, and it was broad. Like, their heads, even when they're smaller, are fairly broad. It looks kind of like big knothead there. I mean, what do you think realistically is, I know this is not a real concise answer, but I mean, what do you think that the average size that just, hey, these fish can't eat this? They almost physically can't.
So the biggest fish I've seen in a gut was a group of tournament fish we sampled. So I think it was maybe PWT early on in my career or NWT after that. But we were sampling these fish, and I grabbed this fish and it's like, what is in the stomach? I mean, it literally felt like there was a calculator in its stomach.
Not weights and fish. Was that before weights and fish?
This was way before weights and fish, before that was a thing. So we cut this fish open, and it had like an 11-inch freshwater drum in it. And it's exactly what you said, that kind of tall forehead and then tapering down to a, thinner tail. But We don't see many fish over, 9 inches is the largest gizzard shad we've measured in a walleye in the fall in the last 15 years. So on average, they're eating those gizzard shad that are up to 9 inches. As fish size increases, the biggest shad we see increases in the stomach, but 9 inches is kind of the upper end of that.
And I think the thing is that we all want simple answers, like with current, with colors and all that. And I can remember just with clients, because that's the cool thing about my guide services, we got some interesting characters, people that just all from all walks of life. And I've had like scientist guys and different people that they bring things up, and I'm like, the guy knows nothing about what we're doing, but yet he knows about a certain end of science or physics or whatever it may be, right? And all of a sudden you're like, oh my God, this plays into what we're doing. And one of the guys had mentioned to me, he was like, well, you do realize this crankbait that you have, that, when you say you're downsizing, what that actually looks like because of light reflection and refraction down there, that bait appears differently to them that it does to us. No different than when you see like your line going in the water and it looks like it's going one way, and it's obviously we know it's
Angle's
not
different. Yeah.
Right. And so, there's so many things I don't think we have an answer for, but it's things to maybe hopefully generate your thinking in your mind of like, maybe it's like unsolved mysteries, right? It isn't what it appears. Well, X-Files shit going on.
So here's what the diet data tell us about walleye in the fall and the gizzard shad they eat. So if you use bigger baits, you will potentially catch bigger fish, because we see that the maximum shad size increase as walleye size increases. So you can run 8 or 9 inch musky baits if you think that's interesting and want to do that and expect.
I know a guy that does.
You might. But the interesting thing is, at the other end of the spectrum, if you look at the smallest gizzard shad that we've seen in each size range of walleye, and it's 2 inches in every case. So if you use like a 2-inch rip shad, you aren't precluding catching big walleye, because big walleye will have 2.5 inch gizzard shad in their stomach. So you can watch that maximum size increase, but the minimum size doesn't increase as walleye get bigger. They all eat small shad if they're available.
I've done an awful lot of really good fishing in the fall on very small lures, when you think you should be going bigger. And same thing in the summertime. It doesn't matter if you're catching 8, 9, 10 pounders on that Eastern bite. I mean, sometimes having really small stuff is definitely the deal. So, but again, I think there's more than one thing going on there. I don't think this is so simple as to put one factor on it. But so, Travis, I'm glad that you got to spend a little bit more time with us, and we could talk about how your spinner colors are not up to par, but yet somehow you're still catching some fish. Maybe not as many, but some, right?
Well, there are a lot out there, right?
There's a lot of dumb ones out there. It's just like people, some might say. But nevertheless, I feel like you brought it. Producer dude, do you feel like Travis brought it? Because this is like, as many times as we've done this, it's always something kind of fresh or a different take on it.
Yeah, and what I found interesting was still somehow you talked more.
I have to say, I think, if I might come back at some point, I might have to ask that I run it, because I like today.
You did run it. Yeah, I was the guest per se.
That's true.
You shot called.
That's true. No, it's good stuff. I love it. I love this side of the fishing, and I don't necessarily like being on the boat, but I'm always interested in what's going on in the lake.
That is boat specific, producer dude. That really is.
Producer dude is without a doubt the most famous non-fisherman in the state of Ohio, if not the Midwest, because we talk about him in the boat nonstop. People are like, what were those bands you got so your camera guy didn't throw up? And I'm like, and then I show them the video of you collapsing and me stepping over your limp, cold body.
Nobody did anything. They just went, well.
We had a triple on. Well, we had a triple on, and we still had a B-roll camera going. So, we kicked him ultimately to there was a pulse. That's a good video. I'm sure you could put that up in the corner. Captain Chip was the only nice one out of that group and said, should we take him back? And I'm like, hell no.
And I survived and came back and rallied and finished the shoot.
It's a good video if you guys haven't watched. Honestly, like, I've never seen anybody in my time that is seasick to the point of like violently ill, changing colors. And it was like someone turned the switch, and like 10 minutes later, he was back filming, looking through a camera, which if anybody's ever done that, it's difficult anyhow on the water. I don't know I don't know what happened there. There was like some evil witchcraft shit going on. Any rate.
Well, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it. I enjoy this, and it was fun.
Yeah, you guys are definitely got her dialed in. We appreciate all that you're doing from the fisheries standpoint to help us make sure that we can go out there and catch a bunch of fish, and we help understand a little bit more to do that. So producer dude, I think we're gonna let Travis go back to his job and make some more fish indirectly, or save some more, or whatever the hell it is you do. I don't even know.
He's the one making fish.
He does.
Perfect.
I mean, that's my story. It is what it is. He's not making babies or just no. Let's just
now
stop
we're getting
now.
to a weird place.
Yeah, no, we went there. It took long enough. Well, thanks for tuning into the Bigwater podcast. Travis Hartman, producer dude, even got to say a few words today. We didn't kick him out. We may edit him out, but you never know. But we've got a lot of stuff going on, don't we, producer dude? We've got Project Boat. We've got the podcast. We've got videos. What else do we have going on?
That's
Contests.
Contest just ended.
We got, probably by the time this runs, we might have another one going. You never know. Make sure you check us in. We're at bigwaterfishing.com, Facebook, Instagram, just about everywhere. Bigwater Fishing.